Jake Morrison stepped out of his old transport truck and looked at the lake. The water was blue and calm. Small waves moved against the shore. Trees grew thick around the water. Birds he did not know made sounds in the branches. This place was perfect. He had bought this property from a Zentari merchant named Kolvek 3 weeks ago. The alien had sold it cheap. Very cheap. When Jake asked why, Kolvek had looked nervous. The merchant kept saying there were legal problems but would not explain what kind. Jake did not care much about alien legal problems. He just wanted a quiet place to fish and work on his projects. Jake walked around his new home. The house was small but solid. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen. The walls were thick stone. The roof was metal that would last many years. Behind the house sat a workshop with tools and space for building things. A wooden dock stretched into the lake. Everything looked good to Jake. He unpacked his truck slowly. His clothes went into the bedroom. His fishing gear went to the dock. His tools went to the workshop. His food went to the kitchen. Last, he took out Homer. The AI unit was small and square. Jake set it on the kitchen table and turned it on. "Good morning, Jake," Homer said. "I see we have arrived at our new home." "That we have," Jake said. "Run a property scan. I want to know what we own here." Homer's lights blinked. "Scanning now. This may take a few minutes." Jake made coffee while he waited. Through the kitchen window, he could see other houses across the lake. They looked different from his house, taller, more colorful, made from materials that shined in the sun. Alien houses, he figured. "Scan complete," Homer said. "The property deed shows interesting results. Tell me, you own 47 acres. This includes the lake, the shoreline, the house, the workshop, and the dock. You also own the mineral rights, water rights, and something called the North Parking Complex." Jake stopped drinking his coffee. "North Parking Complex?" "Yes. It appears to be a large paved area with space for 300 vehicles. Current satellite images show it is in use by residents of the nearby community." "Huh," Jake said. "That's interesting." That afternoon, Jake took his boat across the lake to look at this parking area. It was big and full of vehicles. Alien vehicles, mostly. They had strange shapes and colors. Some floated a few inches above the ground. Others had too many wheels. All of them were parked on his land. When Jake got back to his house, he found a visitor waiting. The alien was tall and thin. Its skin was gray. Its eyes were large and black. It wore a fancy uniform with many badges and buttons. "Are you the human Jake Morrison?" the alien asked. "I am. I am Vextar, president of the Galactic Homeowners Association. We need to talk." Jake invited Vextar inside. The alien looked around the house with obvious disapproval. It pointed at Jake's fishing rods. "Those will have to go," Vextar said. "Excuse me?" "The fishing equipment. It violates our community standards. Also, that dock is too big. The workshop is too noisy. The house color is wrong. You have many violations." Vextar pulled out a tablet and began reading. Violation 1. Dock exceeds maximum size by 15 feet. Violation 2. Workshop creates noise pollution. Violation 3. House exterior does not match approved color palette. Violation 4. Fishing equipment visible from community areas. Violation 5. Vehicle not registered with parking authority. Jake listened patiently. "Are you done?" "No." Violation 6. Failure to pay community fees. Violation 7. No landscape plan submitted. Violation 8. Outdoor furniture not approved style. Vextar looked up from the tablet. "These violations total 47,000 credits in fines. That's a lot of money." "Indeed. You have 30 days to comply with all standards and pay all fines. If you do not, we will begin eviction proceedings." Jake scratched his beard. "Can I see the paperwork that gives you authority over my property?" "Of course." Vextar handed him a thick folder. The Galactic Homeowners Association was established 12 years ago, with full legal authority over this residential zone. All property owners must comply with our standards. Jake looked through the papers. They were written in multiple languages. Some parts he could read. Others were in alien script. This is pretty complicated stuff, indeed. Alien legal systems are far more advanced than primitive human law. I suggest you find a good lawyer. After Vexitar left, Jake sat on his dock with a beer and watched the sun set over his lake. Homer sat beside him. "That alien seemed upset," Homer said. "Yeah, he did." Jake took a sip of beer. "Homer, I want you to do some research." "What kind of research?" "Everything. Property records, legal filings, HOA establishment documents, local laws, colonial regulations. I want to know exactly what authority this Vextar character actually has. Beginning research now. This may take several hours. Take your time. We're not going anywhere. The next morning, Jake woke up to find more visitors. 3 aliens stood on his porch. They wore matching uniforms and carried official-looking badges. The leader was short and round with blue skin. Jake Morrison? That's me. I am Inspector Zilmoth from the Community Compliance Office. We are here to conduct a property inspection. Do you have a warrant? Zilmoth laughed. Human, you clearly do not understand how things work here. The HOA has full authority to inspect any property at any time. This is not Earth. Jake stepped back and let them inside. The 3 aliens walked through his house, making notes on their tablets. They measured his dock. They looked inside his workshop. They counted his fishing rods. They took pictures of everything. Well, Jake asked when they finished. You have many serious violations, Zilmoth said, more than President Vextar initially documented. I count 63 separate infractions. The total fine is now 89,000 credits. That's quite an increase. Compliance with community standards is expensive but necessary. You have 28 days remaining. After the inspectors left, Jake found Homer blinking rapidly on the kitchen table. Research complete, the AI said. You need to see this information immediately. What did you find? The HOA's legal authority is not as clear as they claim. In fact, there are several major discrepancies in their documentation. Jake sat down. Tell me everything. The property deed you received from Kolvek has a date stamp of colony year 387. The HOA establishment documents are dated colony year 437. Your deed predates their authority by 50 years. Jake smiled for the first time in 2 days. What else? The north parking complex they are using was never legally transferred to community ownership. According to all records, you own that land and everything on it. So all those vehicles are parked on my property without permission? Correct. Also, your water rights include the main reservoir that supplies the community. They have been selling water to residents without compensating you as the actual owner. Jake leaned back in his chair and looked out at his peaceful lake. This was going to be interesting. The next few days were quiet. Jake spent his time fishing and learning about his new home. The lake had many fish. Some looked like earth fish. Others were clearly alien species with strange colors and extra fins. All of them tasted good when cooked over his small fire pit. On the 4th day, Vextar returned. This time, he brought friends. 5 aliens stood on Jake's porch. They all wore expensive clothes and carried official folders. Mr. Morrison, Vextar said, allow me to introduce the HOA Board of Directors. The aliens stepped forward one by one. There was Krisa, a tall alien with purple skin who served as secretary. Next came Vorthak, who had 4 arms and managed community finances. Then came Yilnar, a floating alien who handled legal affairs. Finally, there was Baktel, who looked like a giant insect and ran security operations. We are here to discuss your compliance issues, Vextar said. Jake invited them all inside. They sat around his small kitchen table. The chairs creaked under their weight. Krisa pulled out a measuring device and began scanning the room. As suspected, she said, this dwelling is completely non-compliant with community standards. In what way? Jake asked. Yilnar opened his folder. The walls are the wrong color. Community standard requires soft blue-green tones. Your walls are brown wood. The ceiling is too low, added Vorthak. Standard height is 4 meters. Yours measures only 2.5 meters. Baktel clicked his mandibles together. The security system is inadequate. No biometric scanners. No energy shields. No automated defense systems. Jake listened to each complaint. Anything else? Much more, Vextar said. Your dock violates 17 separate regulations. The workshop produces unauthorized noise levels. Your vehicle lacks proper community registration. The landscaping is completely wrong. Krisa handed Jake a tablet. This is your compliance plan. Everything must be completed within 25 days. Jake looked at the list. Replace all exterior walls with approved materials. Install proper ceiling height by excavating foundation. Build new dock to exact specifications. Remove all workshop equipment. Replace all landscaping with approved plants. Install community standard security system. The cost estimate was 340,000 credits. This is a lot of work, Jake said. Compliance is not optional. Yilnar replied. These standards maintain property values and community harmony. What if I can't afford all these changes? Then you will be evicted, Bakhtel said. Your property will be sold to cover compliance costs and penalties. After they left, Jake called Homer over to the table. Did you record that conversation? Yes, all conversations are automatically recorded for your protection. Good, what else did your research turn up? Homer's lights blinked. Many interesting facts. The HOA has conducted similar compliance actions against 43 other property owners in the past 5 years. What happened to those owners? 37 were evicted. Their properties were sold at auction. In all cases, the buyers were companies owned by HOA board members. Jake rubbed his chin. So this is a scam. It appears to be a systematic scheme to acquire property at below market prices. Who were the 6 owners who didn't get evicted? All were wealthy aliens who could afford the compliance costs. Interestingly, 3 of them are now HOA board members themselves. That evening, Jake took his boat across the lake to visit his nearest neighbor. The house was small like his, but painted bright pink. An elderly human woman was tending a flower garden. You must be Jake, she said. I'm Betty Collins. Been watching those aliens visit you. They want me to change everything about my property. Betty laughed bitterly. They tried the same thing with me 2 years ago. Wanted me to spend 200,000 credits making my house look like theirs. What happened? I fought them for 8 months. Cost me 30,000 credits in legal fees. Finally had to give in and make most of the changes they wanted. Jake looked at her house. It still looked human to him. Doesn't look like you changed much. Oh, I changed plenty. Had to repaint the house 3 times before they approved the color. Had to rebuild my porch twice. Had to install their fancy security system that cost me 500 credits per month to maintain. That's expensive. Everything about this HOA is expensive. They charge fees for everything. Parking fees, water fees, garbage fees, security fees, maintenance fees. I pay almost 3,000 credits per month just to live in my own home. Jake thought about this. Betty, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you know anything about the history of this area? Before the HOA? Betty sat down on her porch steps. I've been here 15 years. Bought the place from a Zentari farmer who was retiring. Back then, this was all just lakefront property, quiet and peaceful. The Zentaris had been here for decades. When did the HOA start? About 12 years ago. A group of wealthy aliens bought land on the other side of the lake and built those fancy houses. Then they formed the HOA and claimed authority over the whole area. Did they have legal authority? They said they did. Had lots of papers and official stamps. Most folks just went along with it. The few who fought them lost. Jake thanked Betty and rode home. Homer was waiting with more information. I found the original colonial land grants, the AI said. This entire area was originally granted to human settlers in colony year 298. The grants were later sold to Zentari farmers in colony year 312. What about the aliens who formed the HOA? They purchased land in colony year 435, but only on the eastern shore of the lake. They had no legal claim to the western shore where your property is located. So they just took control illegally? It appears so. They filed documents claiming authority over the entire lake district, but these documents were never properly reviewed by colonial authorities. Jake poured himself a drink and sat on his dock. The alien houses across the lake glowed with colored lights. They looked expensive and fancy. His simple wooden house looked poor by comparison. But his house was his. He had bought it legally. He owned the land it sat on. The next morning brought another visitor. This time it was just Zilmoth, the compliance inspector. He looked nervous. Mr. Morrison, I have an offer from the HOA board. I'm listening. They understand that full compliance may be difficult for a human of limited means. They are willing to purchase your property for fair market value. How much? Zilmoth handed him a paper. 50,000 credits. Jake looked at the number. He had paid 80,000 credits for the property 3 weeks ago. This is below what I paid for it. Property values have declined due to your violations. This is a generous offer considering the circumstances. I'll think about it. You have 22 days remaining for compliance. After that, eviction proceedings will begin automatically. After Zilmoth left, Jake called Homer to the kitchen table. What's the real value of this property? Based on recent sales of similar lakefront properties, current market value is approximately 200,000 credits. So they're offering me 1/4 of what it's worth. Correct. Also, I discovered something else interesting about the compliance timeline. What? The 30-day compliance period is not legally binding. Colonial law requires 90 days minimum for property modification orders. Jake smiled. These aliens thought they were so much smarter than humans. They thought their fancy legal system was better than human law, but they had made mistakes. Big mistakes. And Jake was starting to see exactly how to use those mistakes against them. He spent the rest of the day fishing and thinking. The sun was warm on his back. The lake was calm and peaceful. Birds sang in the trees. This was his home now. His lake, his dock, his workshop. And nobody was going to take it away from him, not without a fight. Jake spent the next morning at the Colonial Records office in town. The building was old and made of gray stone. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched from floor to ceiling. A tired-looking human clerk named Pete sat behind a wooden desk. "What can I help you with?" Pete asked. "I need to research property records for the Lake District." "Going back as far as you have," Pete groaned. "That's a lot of paperwork. Most folks just use the digital system. I want to see the original paper documents." "Any particular reason?" Jake showed him his property deed. "I'm having a dispute with the HOA. Want to make sure I understand my legal position." Pete's expression changed. "Oh, you're the guy who bought the Zentari place. Heard Vextar was giving you trouble. You know about that?" "Everybody knows. That HOA has been bullying property owners for years. Never seen anyone fight back successfully, though." Pete led Jake to a storage room filled with boxes. "Colony years 280 to 400 are in these boxes. Good luck." Jake spent 6 hours going through dusty files. Homer helped by scanning documents and organizing information. Slowly, a picture emerged of how this area had developed over the decades. In colony year 298, the colonial government had granted large sections of land to human settlers. The grants included mineral rights, water rights, and full ownership of natural features like lakes and rivers. Jake found the original grant for his area. It covered 3,000 acres, including the entire lake and surrounding forest. In colony year 312, most human settlers had sold their grants to Zentari farmers. The Zentaris wanted the land for agriculture and were willing to pay good prices. The sales included all rights and privileges from the original grants. In colony year 387, Kolvek had inherited the property from his father. The inheritance documents showed he owned the complete original grant area, not just the small section Jake had bought. "Homer, this doesn't make sense. If Kolvek owned 3,000 acres, why did I only buy 47 acres? Let me cross-reference the sales records," Homer said. His lights blinked rapidly. "I found multiple property sales by Kolvek over the past 15 years. He sold most of his land in small parcels to various buyers. Who bought the land where the HOA houses are? Multiple transactions to different alien buyers. But all transactions occurred after colony year 435, after the HOA was formed." "Correct." Jake found more interesting documents. The HOA and corporation papers claimed authority over all residential properties in the designated Lake District Community Zone. But the zone boundaries were never officially approved by colonial authorities. They just drew their own map and declared themselves in charge. Jake muttered. Homer had found something else. "Jake, look at this parking lot deed." The document was buried in a stack of municipal filings. It showed that the North Parking Complex had been built in colony year 439 on land leased from Kolvek. The lease was for 5 years with an option to purchase, but there was no record of a purchase ever taking place. So the HOA built a parking lot on Zentari land and never bought it? Correct. The lease expired in colony year 444. No renewal was ever filed, which means they've been operating illegally for 8 years. It appears so. Jake found even more interesting information in the water rights files. The original human land grants included rights to all water sources on the property. This included not just the lake, but also underground springs and aquifers. The HOA had built a water treatment plant in colony year 441. They drew water from the underground aquifer and sold it to community residents, but they had never purchased water rights from Kolvek. "They're selling my water without permission," Jake said. "Technically, it was Kolvek's water. But since he sold you the property, the water rights transferred to you." Jake gathered copies of all the important documents. Pete helped him organize everything into folders. "This is some serious ammunition you've got here," Pete said. "That HOA has been cutting corners for years. Someone should have challenged them long ago. Why didn't anyone? Most folks who bought property from Kolvik were aliens who just wanted to fit in with the HOA. The few humans who complained got steamrolled by fancy lawyers and threats. What about Kolvik? Why didn't he fight them? Pete shrugged. Zentaris are peaceful folks. They don't like conflict. Kolvik probably just wanted to sell his land and retire quietly. That afternoon, Jake drove to the other side of town to visit Kolvik. The old Zentari lived in a small apartment complex for retired aliens. He looked surprised when Jake knocked on his door. Mr. Morrison, is there problem with property? No problem with the property, but I have some questions about the HOA. Kolvik invited Jake inside. The apartment was small but comfortable. Pictures of the lake property covered the walls. I love that land, Kolvik said. My family lived there for 75 years. Why did you sell it? Kolvik looked sad. The HOA made life very difficult. They said I was not maintaining property to community standards. They demanded I pay many fees and make many changes. Did you fight them? At first, yes. I hired lawyer. Cost much money. But HOA had more lawyers and more money. After 2 years, I was tired of fighting. So you sold them the land? No, I would never sell to them. I sold to you because you are human. Humans understand simple life. Jake showed Kolvik some of the documents he had found. The old Zentari's eyes widened as he read. They never owned parking lot. No, you only leased it to them temporarily. And they never bought water rights? No, they've been stealing your water for years. Kolvik stood up and walked to his window. He looked out at the city skyline. I was foolish old farmer. I did not understand their legal tricks. It's not your fault. They deliberately confused the issues. What will you do with this information? Jake thought about that question. He could use the documents to force the HOA to leave him alone. But that would not help Betty Collins or the other residents who had been bullied over the years. I'm going to fix this situation properly. How? I'm still working on that part. That evening, Jake sat on his dock with Homer and reviewed everything they had learned. The HOA had built their entire operation on illegal foundations. They had no authority over his property. They had no right to charge parking fees. They had no right to sell water. But they had been doing all of these things for years. They had lawyers and money and political connections. They thought they were untouchable. Homer, what would happen if I just posted no trespassing signs at the parking lot? Legal analysis suggests you have that right as the property owner. And what if I cut off their access to the water supply? Also within your rights, though it might cause humanitarian issues for residents. Jake thought about Betty Collins and the other residents who were victims of HOA bullying. He did not want to hurt innocent people, but he also could not let the HOA continue their illegal operations. There has to be a way to use this information strategically. What do you mean? I mean there has to be a way to win this fight without becoming the bad guy. Jake spent the rest of the evening reading legal documents and thinking about strategy. The HOA thought they held all the cards. They thought human law was primitive compared to their advanced alien legal system. They were about to learn that sometimes primitive systems work better than complicated ones. Sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective, and sometimes the guy with the biggest legal team is not the guy who wins the fight. Jake smiled as he watched the stars reflect on his lake. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Jake woke up to find his power was off. No lights, no refrigerator, no Homer. He walked outside and saw that the power lines to his house had been cut. Clean cuts made by professional tools. A note was stuck to his front door. Final notice, compliance deadline reduced to 7 days due to continued violations. Pay all fines or face immediate eviction. Galactic Homeowners Association Board of Directors. Jake started his backup generator and got Homer running again. They cut my power. I observed the interruption at 0347 hours. The cuts appear to have been made by industrial plasma tools. Is that legal? Colonial utility regulations require 48 hours notice before service termination. No notice was provided. Jake called the power company. A bored alien operator told him that service had been suspended at the request of the community authority. Restoration would require payment of all outstanding community fees. What fees? According to my records, you owe 89,000 credits in compliance violations plus 12,000 credits in utility connection fees. I never agreed to pay utility connection fees to the HOA. Sir, all residents in the Lake District pay utility fees through the Community Association. This has been standard procedure for 12 years. Jake hung up and called the Colonial Utilities Commission. After an hour of being transferred between departments, he reached a human clerk named Linda. "The HOA has no authority to collect utility fees," Linda said. "That's illegal. Can you restore my power?" "I'll file an emergency restoration order. Should have your power back by this afternoon." "What about the illegal fees?" "File a complaint with our fraud investigation department. We'll look into it." 2 hours later, Jake's power came back on, but now his water was shut off. Another note appeared on his door. "Water service suspended for non-payment of community fees." Jake called the water company and got the same runaround. Homer analyzed the situation while Jake filled buckets from the lake. "The HOA appears to have administrative control over all utilities in this area," Homer said. "They act as a billing intermediary between residents and utility companies, so they can shut off anyone's utilities whenever they want." "Within certain legal limitations, yes." "What are the legal limitations?" "Emergency services cannot be suspended. Medical necessity exceptions apply, and proper notice must be provided." Jake thought about this while he hand-pumped water from the lake to fill his storage tank. The HOA was escalating the conflict. They wanted to make his life so difficult that he would give up and sell. That afternoon, he discovered they had blocked his access road. Large concrete barriers now prevented vehicles from reaching his house. A sign read, "Road closed by order of Community Safety Authority." Jake called the county road department. The human supervisor named Bob sounded frustrated. "That's not a community road," Bob said. "It's a private access easement that runs through HOA property. They can block it legally. How am I supposed to get to my house? Technically, you still have lake access by boat. What if there's an emergency? File an appeal with the Colony Transportation Authority. Might take 6 to 8 weeks." Jake hung up and looked at the concrete barriers. Each one weighed several tons. Moving them would require heavy equipment. The HOA had thought this through carefully. "Looks like I'm using the boat for everything now," Jake said. That evening, while Jake was cooking dinner on his backup propane stove, he heard engines outside. 3 large vehicles had parked on the blocked access road. Armed aliens in security uniforms got out and began setting up equipment. Jake walked out to meet them. The leader was a massive Krillian with 4 arms and natural armor plating. His name tag read Security Chief Brechthel. "You are trespassing," Brechthel said. "This is my property. This property has been condemned by community safety authorities. You must evacuate immediately. I haven't seen any condemnation order." Brechthel handed Jake a tablet. The document was written in alien script with a human translation attached. It declared Jake's property a community safety hazard due to substandard construction and environmental violations. "This is garbage," Jake said. "Compliance with safety standards is not optional. You have until sunrise to remove all personal belongings, and if I don't, forcible eviction will commence at 0600 hours. The security team set up floodlights around Jake's property. They positioned surveillance equipment to monitor all approaches. They established a communications post with direct links to HOA headquarters. Jake went back inside and activated Homer's secure communications mode. Contact Betty Collins. Tell her to meet me at the old fishing pier in 1 hour. Betty arrived by boat as Jake had expected. She looked worried. "They've got your place surrounded," she said. "I noticed." "Betty, I need to ask you something important. Are you the only human left in this community?" "There are 3 others. Old Pete from the records office lives on the South Shore. Maria Santos has a place near the boat launch. And there's Crazy Jim who lives in a cabin up in the hills. What about the other residents who got evicted? Most left the planet entirely. A few moved to the city. None stayed in the area." Jake told Betty about everything he had discovered in the property records. Her eyes got wide as she listened. "You mean they've been operating illegally this whole time?" "Completely illegally. They have no authority over your property or anyone else's. Then why haven't the colonial authorities stopped them?" "Because nobody ever challenged them with proper documentation. Everyone who fought back did it the wrong way." Betty was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to end this, but I need help from the other humans in the community." "What kind of help?" Jake outlined his plan. Betty listened carefully, asking questions about timing and logistics. When he finished, she was smiling. "It's risky," she said. "Very risky, but it should work. When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning, right after they try to evict me." Betty shook hands with Jake and headed back to her boat. Good luck. I'll contact the others tonight. Jake spent the evening preparing. He copied all his important documents onto multiple data storage devices. He packed his essential belongings into waterproof containers. He programmed Homer with detailed instructions for various contingency scenarios. Around midnight, the security team started making noise. They played loud music and shined bright lights at his house. They were trying to prevent him from sleeping. Jake put in earplugs and pulled blankets over the windows. He had slept through worse things during his military service. A few noisy aliens were not going to keep him awake. At 500 hours, Brechthul announced through a loudspeaker that eviction would begin in 1 hour. Jake made coffee and breakfast on his propane stove. He checked his equipment one more time. Everything was ready. At exactly 600 hours, the security team approached his house. Brechthul carried a plasma cutter for breaking down the door. Other aliens carried boxes for removing Jake's belongings. Jake opened the door before they could break it down. "Good morning, gentlemen. Step aside, human. This property is now under community authority." "Actually, I don't think it is." Jake handed Brechthul a legal document. "This is a restraining order issued by the Colonial District Court. It prohibits any HOA actions against my property pending resolution of ownership disputes." Brechthul looked at the paper with confusion. "This is human legal document." "Yes, it is. Filed under colonial law, which takes precedence over community regulations. I will contact HOA legal department." "You do that. In the meantime, you and your team are trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before I file additional charges." The security team huddled together and made several communication calls. After 30 minutes, they packed up their equipment and drove away. Jake sat on his porch and watched them leave. The restraining order would hold them off for a while, but it was just the opening move in a much larger game. The real battle was about to begin. 3 days later, Jake received an official invitation printed on expensive paper. "The Galactic Homeowners Association Board of Directors requests the honor of your presence at an emergency community meeting to address the Morrison property dispute." The meeting was scheduled for the next evening at the community center. Jake noticed that several important names were listed as special guests. Colonial Administrator Rexdun would attend. District Legal Supervisor Molkar was coming. Even Senator Yulveth from the Planetary Council planned to be there. "They're making this a big public event," Jake said to Homer. "Analysis suggests they intend to demonstrate their political influence and legal authority. Or they want to humiliate me in front of important people. That interpretation is also consistent with the evidence." Jake spent the day preparing. He organized his documents into clear categories. He practiced presenting complex legal information in simple terms. Most importantly, he prepared questions designed to make the HOA board reveal information they probably wanted to keep secret. Betty Collins stopped by in the afternoon. She brought Pete from the records office, Maria Santos from the boat launch, and a wiry old man Jake had not met before. "This is Jim Walker," Betty said. "Lives up in the hills. Used to be a colonial legal clerk before he retired." Jim shook Jake's hand. "Heard you're taking on the HOA single-handed." "Something like that. Brave or stupid. Haven't decided which yet. Maybe both." Jim laughed. "In that case, you might actually win this thing." The group spent an hour reviewing Jake's strategy. Jim pointed out several legal technicalities that could be important. Maria shared information about water usage patterns in the community. Pete provided background on how the HOA had manipulated colonial bureaucrats over the years. "Remember," Jim said as they prepared to leave, "let them do most of the talking tonight. The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make. And don't let them make you angry," Betty added. "They'll try to provoke you into saying something stupid." That evening, Jake dressed in his best clothes and walked to the community center. The building was packed. All the alien residents were there, along with the special guests and several news reporters. Jake counted at least 200 people. Vextar stood at a podium on the stage. Behind him sat the HOA board and their lawyers. The special guests occupied a section of honor in the front row. Jake found an empty chair near the back. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all species," Vextar began, "we are gathered tonight to address a serious threat to our community. The crowd murmured agreement. Vextar gestured toward Jake. Mr. Morrison has refused to comply with reasonable community standards. He has filed frivolous legal documents to delay legitimate eviction proceedings. Most seriously, he has threatened the safety and security of our entire residential district. More murmurs from the crowd. Jake sat quietly and took notes. Tonight, with our distinguished guests as witnesses, we will resolve this matter once and for all. Vextar introduced the special guests. Colonial Administrator Rexton was a dignified Altarian with silver skin and formal robes. District Legal Supervisor Molkar looked like a giant spider wearing a judge's wig. Senator Yulveth resembled a floating jellyfish with multiple eyes. These respected officials understand the importance of maintaining community standards, Vextar said. They support our efforts to preserve property values and neighborhood harmony. Rexton stood up and spoke briefly about the need for orderly development and respect for established authority. Molkar discussed the importance of legal compliance and consequences for those who disrupt community peace. Senator Yulveth talked about supporting local governance and maintaining colonial stability. All three officials made it clear they expected the HOA to handle this situation decisively. Thank you for those words of wisdom, Vextar said. Now let us review the facts of this case. Yilnar, the HOA's legal director, took the podium. He had prepared a detailed presentation with charts and images. He showed pictures of Jake's substandard house compared to proper alien dwellings. He listed all the violations and fines. He explained how Jake's resistance threatened community harmony. This human clearly does not understand advanced legal concepts, Yilnar said. His primitive legal system cannot comprehend the sophisticated regulatory framework we have established. The crowd laughed at this. Jake wrote more notes. Zilmoth, the compliance inspector, spoke next. He described Jake's property as a hazard to community safety. He claimed the workshop created dangerous noise pollution. He argued that the fishing equipment was environmentally destructive. Humans have no understanding of proper environmental stewardship, Zilmoth said. They consume resources wastefully and show no respect for natural beauty. More laughter from the crowd. Jake continued taking notes. Finally, Vextar returned to the podium. The evidence is clear. Mr. Morrison must comply with community standards or be removed. There is no alternative. However, Vextar continued, we are not unreasonable. We will give Mr. Morrison one final opportunity to address this assembly and explain his position. Jake stood up and walked to the podium. The crowd was hostile but curious. The special guest looked bored, as if this was just a formality before the inevitable eviction. Thank you for inviting me tonight, Jake said. I have a few questions before I respond to your concerns. Vextar looked surprised. Questions? Yes. Simple questions about community authority and legal jurisdiction. Jake pulled out his tablet and consulted his notes. Mr. Yilnar, you mentioned the sophisticated regulatory framework established by the HOA. When exactly was this framework approved by colonial authorities? It was approved when we incorporated the association in colony year 437. I see. And which colonial office approved your authority over existing property owners? Yilnar hesitated. The incorporation documents were filed with the Standard Business Registration Office. So no colonial office specifically granted you authority over private property? The authority was implicit in our incorporation. Jake nodded and made a note. Mr. Zilmoth, you mentioned environmental concerns about my workshop and fishing equipment. Have you conducted environmental impact studies to support these claims? Visual inspection is sufficient to identify violations. So no scientific studies? None were necessary. Jake made another note. Mr. Vextar, you said I must pay community fees for utilities and services. Can you show me the legal agreement that obligates me to pay these fees? All property owners in the district pay community fees. This has been standard practice for 12 years. That's not what I asked. I asked for the legal agreement that creates this obligation. Vextar looked at his lawyers. They whispered together briefly. The obligation arises from community membership. And when did I become a community member? when you purchased property in the district. Jake smiled. Interesting theory. One more question. You claim authority over my dock, my workshop, and my parking area. Can you show me the deed or title document that gives you ownership of these facilities? We have regulatory authority, not ownership. Under what colonial law does this regulatory authority exist? The lawyers whispered more urgently. Vextar looked uncomfortable. The authority exists under standard community association regulations. Can you cite the specific regulation? Long pause. I will have our legal staff provide that information later. Jake closed his tablet. Thank you. Those questions help clarify the situation. He looked out at the crowd. Colonial Administrator Rexdun was no longer looking bored. District Legal Supervisor Molkar was taking notes. Senator Yulveth's multiple eyes were focused intently on Jake. Now I'm ready to respond to your concerns. Jake opened his folder of documents and placed them on the podium. The crowd was silent now. Even the reporters were paying attention. Before I address the HOA's concerns about my property, I'd like to share some interesting historical information I discovered at the Colonial Records Office. Jake activated the display screen behind him and showed the first document. This is the original land grant for this area, issued in colony year 298 to human settlers. The grant includes 3,000 acres, mineral rights, water rights, and full ownership of all natural features including the lake. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Frexadun leaned forward in his seat. In colony year 312, this land was sold to Zentari farmers. The sale included all rights and privileges from the original human grant. Jake showed the next document. This is the deed I received when I purchased my property from Kolvek 3 weeks ago. As you can see, it includes the same rights and privileges that have been passed down for over a century. Now here's where things get interesting. Jake displayed a map showing property boundaries. The HOA was incorporated in colony year 437. But look at what they claimed authority over. The map showed the HOA's claimed jurisdiction covering the entire Lake District, including Jake's property and the properties of all current residents. The problem is they never actually owned this land. They just drew lines on a map and declared themselves in charge. Vextar stood up. This is irrelevant. Property law has evolved since those primitive human grants. Actually, it hasn't. Jake showed the next document. Colonial Charter Section 12 clearly states that original land grants maintain legal precedence over all subsequent claims. The colonial government cannot revoke rights that were legally granted to previous owners. District Legal Supervisor Molkar was now taking rapid notes. Senator Yulveth had moved to the edge of his seat. But that's just the beginning, Jake said. Let me show you what the HOA has been doing with property they don't actually own. Jake displayed a photo of the parking lot. This is the North Parking Complex, which serves this entire community. According to HOA records, they built this facility in colony year 439 on land leased from Kolvek. He showed the lease agreement. The lease was for 5 years with an option to purchase, but no purchase ever took place. The lease expired in colony year 444. For the past 8 years, the HOA has been operating a parking facility on my land without permission. They've been charging residents parking fees for the use of my property. The crowd was getting restless. Several aliens were speaking in urgent whispers. Vextar looked pale. It gets worse, Jake continued. Let me show you the water rights situation. He displayed a geological survey map. The original land grant included rights to all water sources on the property. This includes the lake, surface streams, and underground aquifers. Jake pointed to a spot on the map. The HOA built their water treatment plant right here in colony year 441. They draw water from the underground aquifer and sell it to community residents. But they never purchased water rights from Kolvek. For the past 12 years, they've been stealing my water and selling it for profit. The crowd erupted. Residents began shouting questions about their water bills. Several aliens stood up and demanded explanations from the HOA board. Rexdun called for order. Mr. Morrison, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation to support these claims? I have complete documentation. Jake gestured to his folder. Original land grants, deed transfers, lease agreements, incorporation papers, and geological surveys. Everything properly certified by the Colonial Records Office. Molkar stood up. May I examine these documents? Of course, Jake handed his folder to the legal supervisor. Molokar spread the papers across a table and began reading with several assistants. The crowd waited in tense silence. After 20 minutes, Molokar returned to the microphone. I have reviewed the documentation. The legal claims appear to be valid. What does that mean? Someone shouted from the audience. It means Mr. Morrison legally owns the parking facility, the water rights, and has legal precedence over HOA authority regarding his property. The crowd exploded again. Residents demanded to know how much money they had paid for illegally obtained services. Several aliens called for the immediate resignation of the HOA board. Vextar grabbed the microphone. This is a misunderstanding. Our lawyers will resolve these technical issues. Actually, there's one more thing, Jake said. Homer, display the mineral rights survey. The screen showed a detailed geological map with colored zones indicating different mineral deposits. A large red area covered most of the Lake District. The original land grant included mineral rights to rare earth deposits under this entire area. These minerals are essential for spaceship manufacturing and quantum communication systems. Jake pointed to a specific location on the map. The Colonial Spaceport was built right here in Colony Year 445. The main landing platforms sit directly above the primary mineral deposit. Senator Yulveth suddenly looked very interested. Are you claiming ownership of the spaceport site? I'm claiming ownership of the mineral rights under the spaceport site, rights that were never legally transferred to the colonial government. The implications of this statement hit the crowd like a physical blow. The spaceport handled all interplanetary traffic for the colony. If Jake owned the mineral rights, he could potentially shut down all space travel. Rexton stood up urgently. Mr. Morrison, surely you don't intend to disrupt spaceport operations over a property dispute. I have no intention of disrupting anything. I just want the HOA to stop harassing me and other residents. What exactly do you want? Jake looked out at the crowd of residents who had been bullied and cheated for years. He thought about Betty Collins paying outrageous fees just to live in her own home. He thought about all the families who had been forced to sell their property below market value. I want justice. I want the HOA to compensate all residents who were illegally charged fees. I want them to return money stolen through fraudulent parking and water charges. And I want a new community association that operates legally and treats all residents fairly. Vextar was now visibly sweating. These demands are unreasonable. We cannot simply abandon 12 years of community development. You should have thought about that before you built your development on stolen land. Jake turned to address the colonial officials. Administrator Rex Dunn, I'm prepared to work with colonial authorities to resolve this situation peacefully. But I will not be bullied into giving up my legal rights. Rexton nodded slowly. We will need time to review all the legal implications. Take all the time you need. But until this is resolved, I'm posting no trespassing signs at the parking facility, and I'm shutting off water access to anyone who refuses to pay proper compensation for water rights. The crowd erupted one final time. Residents rushed toward the HOA board demanding answers. The colonial officials huddled together in urgent discussion. Several news reporters were already transmitting breaking news updates. Jake packed up his documents and walked toward the exit. As he reached the door, Vextar called out to him, Morrison, this isn't over. Jake turned around and smiled. You're absolutely right. It's just beginning. The next morning, Jake found armed security forces surrounding his property. But these were not HOA guards. These were colonial Marines wearing official government uniforms. A human colonel named Harris was in charge. Mr. Morrison, I'm Colonel Harris with Colonial Security. I need to speak with you about yesterday's revelations. Jake invited the colonel inside for coffee. Harris was a professional soldier with graying hair and intelligent eyes. That was quite a presentation you gave last night, Harris said. Just sharing some historical facts. Facts that could shut down interplanetary commerce for the entire sector. Jake sipped his coffee. I have no interest in shutting down anything. I just want to live peacefully on my own property. The problem is, your property rights create a legal crisis that extends far beyond this local dispute. Harris pulled out a tablet and showed Jake several news reports. The story has spread to other colonies. Legal experts across the galaxy are questioning the validity of similar community associations. Property values are fluctuating wildly. Some colonies are facing lawsuits from original land grant families. That's not my fault. No, but you're the one who opened this can of worms. Jake thought about this. He had focused on his local situation without considering the broader implications. But that was not his responsibility. What do the colonial authorities want from me? They want a reasonable resolution that doesn't destabilize the entire colonial legal system. And what do I want? Harris smiled. That's what we're here to find out. That afternoon, a formal negotiation session convened at the Colonial Administration Building. Jake sat at one end of a long table. The HOA board sat at the other end with their team of lawyers. Colonial officials occupied chairs along both sides. Administrator Rexton acted as mediator. Gentlemen, we need to find a solution that addresses everyone's legitimate interests. Vextar spoke first. The HOA is willing to acknowledge some technical irregularities in our original incorporation. We propose paying Mr. Morrison a reasonable settlement in exchange for his agreement not to interfere with community operations. How much? Jake asked. 500,000 credits. Jake almost laughed. That's not even close to what you've stolen over the years. We reject the characterization of our actions as theft. Jake pulled out his calculator. Let me show you some numbers. You've charged parking fees to 300 vehicles for 8 years. Average fee is 100 credits per month. That's 28 million credits in parking revenue from my land. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed this number. Water sales are even more profitable. You sell water to 600 residents at an average cost of 200 credits per month. Over 12 years, that's 144 million credits in water revenue from my aquifer. Vextar's lawyer objected. Those calculations don't account for infrastructure costs and maintenance expenses. Fine. Let's say your actual profit was only 10% of gross revenue. That's still 17 million credits stolen from property that legally belongs to me. Rexton looked at the HOA board. Is this calculation accurate? Yilnar consulted with his assistants before answering. The revenue figures appear correct, though we dispute the legal characterization. What settlement amount would you consider reasonable? Rexton asked Jake. Full restitution of all illegally collected fees plus damages for 12 years of property rights violations. I estimate the total at around 25 million credits. Several HOA board members stood up and began shouting. Vextar pounded the table. This is extortion. This is justice, Jake replied calmly. Rex Dunn called for a recess. During the break, Colonel Harris approached Jake privately. You realize they can't pay 25 million credits. That's their problem. If the HOA goes bankrupt, the colonial government will have to manage all community services. That could destabilize the entire colony. Jake considered this. What alternative do you suggest? Compromise. Take a smaller settlement and help establish a legitimate community association. How much smaller? Maybe 5 million credits plus agreements on proper water and parking arrangements. Jake walked outside to think. Betty Collins was waiting for him in the parking area. How's it going in there? She asked. They want me to compromise. What do you want to do? Jake looked at the colonial building and thought about all the residents who had been victimized by HOA corruption. I want to win this completely, but I also don't want to hurt innocent people. So what's the plan? I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse. When the negotiation resumed, Jake presented his final terms. I want the current HOA board to resign immediately. I want 5 million credits in compensation for past violations. I want a new community association established with proper legal authority. And I want Betty Collins elected as the first president of the new association. That's still too much money. Vextar protested. Then let me explain your alternatives. Jake activated a wall display and showed the mineral rights map again. If we cannot reach agreement, I will exercise my legal rights as owner of the mineral deposits. What does that mean? Rexton asked. It means I will require all mining operations to cease until proper licensing agreements are negotiated. That includes the rare earth extraction that supports the spaceport. Senator Yulveth leaned forward. You would shut down the spaceport over a local property dispute? I would shut down illegal mining operations on my property. If that affects the spaceport, so be it. Jake showed the next slide. I will also cut off water access to all facilities that refuse to pay market rates for water usage. This includes the spaceport, the Colonial Administration Building, and all businesses in the commercial district. The implications were staggering. Without rare earth minerals, ships could not refuel or repair their quantum drives. Without water, basic life support would fail. The entire colony would become uninhabitable within weeks. You're talking about economic warfare. Colonel Harris said. I'm talking about exercising legal property rights that have been violated for over a decade. Rex Dunn looked around the room at the pale faces of colonial officials. Mr. Morrison, surely we can find a middle ground. I've stated my terms. They're generous considering what's been stolen from me. Jake stood up and gathered his papers. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I start posting eviction notices at the parking lot and water treatment plant. Wait, Vextar said desperately. We need more time to arrange financing. You've had 12 years to arrange proper legal agreements. 24 hours should be plenty of time to do the right thing. Jake walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. I want all residents who were illegally charged fees to receive full refunds. Every credit that was stolen from them over the years. That could be millions more credits. Yilner protested. Then you should have thought about that before you started stealing. Jake left the building and drove home to his peaceful lake. Homer was waiting with status updates. The news networks are calling this the biggest colonial legal crisis in 50 years, Homer reported. Good. Maybe other communities will start demanding honest government. The HOA board is meeting in emergency session. Colonial officials are reviewing all legal options. Let them review. The law's on our side. Jake sat on his dock and watched the sun set over his lake. Tomorrow would bring either victory or a much larger fight. Either way, he was ready. Sometimes the best defense was a good offense. And sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to hit back harder than they expected. The HOA was about to learn both lessons the hard way. Jake woke up to find Colonel Harris and Administrator Rex Dunn waiting on his porch. Both looked tired, as if they had been awake all night. The HOA board has accepted your terms, Rex Dunn said. All of them? All of them. Vextar and the current board will resign today. Betty Collins will serve as interim president while a new community association is established. 5 million credits will be transferred to your account as compensation. What about resident refunds? Harris handed Jake a tablet. We've calculated that approximately 4 million credits in illegal fees were collected over the years. Those refunds will also be paid. Jake looked at the numbers. Most residents would receive between 5,000 and 15,000 credits back. Betty Collins would get almost 30,000 credits for all the fees she had been forced to pay. How is the HOA paying for all this? They're selling community assets and taking emergency loans, Rex Dunn said. Several board members are also liquidating personal investments. And the new community association will be established under proper colonial authority with elected leadership and transparent financial management. Jake poured coffee for his visitors and sat down on the porch. What about the bigger issues? Water rights, mineral rights, parking arrangements. We propose long-term lease agreements, Harris said. You retain ownership but allow community use in exchange for fair compensation. How fair? Rex Dunn consulted his notes. For the parking facility, 100,000 credits per year. For water rights, 300,000 credits per year. For mineral extraction rights, we're still negotiating with the mining companies, but initial estimates suggest around 2 million credits annually. Jake did the math. That's about 2.5 million credits per year in ongoing revenue. Correct. Plus you retain full ownership and can renegotiate terms periodically. What if I just said no to everything and kept exclusive use of my property? Harris looked uncomfortable. That's your legal right. But it would essentially shut down the colony. And that's my problem. How? It's not your problem. But it would affect thousands of innocent people. Jake thought about Betty Collins and the other residents who had been victimized by HOA corruption. They deserved a chance to live peacefully in their homes without being bullied by corrupt officials. I have some additional conditions. What conditions? Rex Dunn asked. First, I want a colonial investigation into HOA corruption. If criminal charges are warranted, they should be filed. Agreed. Second, I want legal protections to prevent similar situations in other colonies. No more community associations operating without proper authority. We'll draft legislation, Harris said. Third, I want a community park built on part of my property. Free access for all residents with proper facilities for families. How much land? 20 acres along the South Shore. I'll donate the land if the new community association maintains it properly. Rex Dunn made notes. Anything else? Yeah, I want a fishing tournament every spring. Winner gets free water and parking for a year. Harris laughed. I think we can arrange that. That afternoon, the entire community gathered at the lake shore for the formal transfer ceremony. Vextar and the HOA board signed resignation papers in front of colonial officials and news reporters. Betty Collins took the oath of office as interim president of the new Lake District Community Association. "My first official act," Betty announced, "is to dissolve all discriminatory regulations and establish fair, transparent policies for community management." The crowd cheered. Many residents had tears in their eyes as they realized their years of bullying and exploitation were finally over. Jake was presented with the largest settlement check in colonial history. 5 million credits for past violations plus guaranteed annual income from property leases. He would never have to worry about money again, but more importantly, he had his peaceful lake back. His dock, his workshop, his simple wooden house. No more threatening letters, no more compliance inspections, no more armed guards. Pete from the records office approached Jake during the celebration. "Hell of a thing you did here. Just wanted to be left alone to fish. You did a lot more than that. You stood up to the bullies and won." Maria Santos joined the conversation. "My grandchildren will grow up in a better community because of what you did." Even old Jim Walker came down from his mountain cabin for the occasion. "Never seen anything like this in 40 years of colonial law. You turned a property dispute into a civil rights victory." As evening approached, most of the crowd went home to celebrate with their families. Jake sat on his dock with Betty Collins, watching the stars reflect on the calm water. "So what now?" Betty asked. "Now I go fishing. Build some new projects in my workshop. Maybe write a book about property law. And the community park? We'll start planning next week. I'm thinking playground equipment, picnic tables, maybe a small beach area for the kids." Betty smiled. "The kids are going to love having a safe place to play." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to night birds calling across the water. The alien houses on the far shore looked peaceful now instead of threatening. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Sure. When did you know you were going to win this fight?" Jake thought about that question. "I think it was when I realized they had made it personal instead of keeping it legal. They tried to intimidate me instead of following proper procedures." "What do you mean?" "Bullies always overreach. They get so used to pushing people around that they forget about consequences. When they cut my power and blocked my road, they gave me evidence of harassment and illegal interference with property rights." "So their aggression actually helped your case?" "Absolutely. If they had just followed proper legal procedures, this might have been a much harder fight." Homer activated on the dock beside them. "Jake, you have 17 interview requests from news networks and 4 offers from publishers who want to buy book rights to your story. Tell them I'm busy fishing." "What about the Colonial Legal Academy?" "They want you to teach a course on property rights and community law." Jake considered this. "Maybe next year. Right now, I just want to enjoy my lake." A month later, the community park was under construction. Children played on new playground equipment, while their parents enjoyed picnic lunches. The lake was full of boats and swimmers enjoying the clean water. Betty Collins had been elected permanent president of the Lake District Community Association. Her first major initiative was a scholarship fund for young people who wanted to study law or public administration. The criminal investigation of the former HOA board resulted in multiple convictions for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. Vextar was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay additional restitution to victims. Jake's story became famous throughout the colonial territories. Similar communities began challenging corrupt homeowners associations and demanding proper legal authority for community governance. But Jake remained focused on simple pleasures. He fished every morning at sunrise. He worked on mechanical projects in his workshop every afternoon. He hosted weekly dinners for Betty, Pete, Maria, and Jim to discuss community issues and tell old stories. On quiet evenings, he sat on his dock with Homer and watched the peaceful lake reflect the stars. This was what he had wanted from the beginning: a place to live simply, work with his hands, and enjoy the natural world. The fact that he had also struck a blow for justice and helped hundreds of families was satisfying. But it was not why he had fought. He had fought because someone tried to take away what was rightfully his. Sometimes that was all it took. One person willing to stand up and say no. One person who understood that bullies only win when good people give up. Jake Morrison had never given up. And now he never had to. He owned the lake, the parking lot, and the mineral rights. But more importantly, he owned his freedom. And that was worth more than all the credits in the galaxy.